Have you ever felt the air shift when you walk past a place the world has long forgotten? Have you ever stared into the windows of a decaying building and felt like something was staring back? Tonight, we take you deep into the heart of what the locals now call Asylum X, an abandoned psychiatric facility so drenched in darkness, even time itself seems afraid to enter. Sealed off for decades, hidden away in the folds of the forest, Asylum X is more than just crumbling walls and rusted beds. It holds secrets. Secrets that were never meant to be uncovered, but someone has opened the door. And once the door is open, you can't close it again. Brace yourself for a terrifying journey through blood-stained corridors, whispers in the shadows, and the unraveling of a nightmare buried in history. You'll hear voices. You'll see things you wish you hadn't. And by the end, you'll question what's real. But before we dive in, I want to know, if you found a journal that revealed the true horrors of a forgotten asylum, would you keep reading or burn it and run? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all. If you're brave enough to uncover what lies ahead, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who thinks they can handle the truth, because this is just the beginning. Now, turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and get ready. We're about to begin Generation 1 of uncovering the dark secrets of abandoned Asylum X. The road to Ravenhurst Asylum wasn't on any modern map. If it ever had a name, it had long been swallowed by the forest that grew too thick around it, as if nature itself was trying to forget. The cracked path wound like a scar through a tangle of black pines, the trees closing in tighter with every mile. Eli Mercer tapped nervously on the dashboard of his rented SUV, the GPS signal having disappeared 30 minutes ago. His cameraman and closest friend, Jonah Pike, sat beside him with a GoPro strapped to his chest and a half grin of unease on his face. "You sure this is the place?" Jonah asked, eyeing the dense woods pressing against the windows. "It looks like something out of a grim fairy tale." Eli didn't respond immediately. He pulled out an old folded map from his backpack, one he'd found in a local historical archive labeled Medical Facilities, Condemned Sites, 1950 to 1975. There, scribbled faintly in pencil, was a name, Ravenhurst Psychiatric Hospital. The final marking read, "Closure, involuntary, do not revisit." "Yeah," Eli finally said. "This is it." They were not thrill seekers. Eli was a freelance journalist obsessed with uncovering the truth behind institutional cover-ups. Jonah, a documentary filmmaker, followed him into every forgotten ruin, every silent grave of history. But Ravenhurst was different. There were no public records, no media coverage, no mention in any newspaper since 1971. The year over 60 patients and 14 staff members vanished without a trace. The asylum stood on a low hill, suddenly emerging from the mist as the car turned a sharp bend. Its skeletal silhouette towered over the treetops, 5 stories of rotting stone and collapsed windows. A rusty sign dangled by a single bolt from 2 iron poles. Ravenhurst State Hospital. They stepped out of the vehicle. Silence met them, deep and suffocating. Not even the wind stirred. Jonah exhaled slowly. "Creepy doesn't even cover it." Eli was already filming. "This is Eli Mercer, reporting from deep within Ashpine County. Behind me stands Ravenhurst Asylum, abandoned for over 5 decades. Locals won't speak of it. Historians pretend it doesn't exist. But we're going in. We're going to find out what really happened here." The camera caught everything. The twisted vines choking the entrance. The shattered stained glass above the archway depicting some saint whose face had long been scratched out. They pushed open the massive double doors which groaned in protest. Inside, the air was thick with mold, dust, and something else. Something coppery and stale. Their footsteps echoed as they entered the main foyer, their flashlight beams dancing across peeling paint and discarded hospital beds. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it childish tags, others more sinister. One phrase was repeated over and over, carved into the wood with something sharp. "Don't wake the sleeping." Jonah focused the lens on it. That's not ominous at all. The first floor was a maze of corridors and shattered rooms, administrative offices, therapy halls, and padded cells with claw marks etched into the walls. Every door they opened creaked like it was breathing its last, and every few minutes Eli would stop and scribble notes into a leather-bound journal. In the eastern wing, they stumbled upon a patient records room. Filing cabinets were overturned, drawers yanked out as if someone had searched them in a hurry. Eli rummaged through the mess, pulling out a file with the name Clara Winters typed neatly across the top. Patient number 1364, committed 1964, transferred to basement ward. June 3rd, 1971. Jonah frowned. That's just 3 days before the asylum was abandoned. They shared a glance. The floor beneath them groaned sharply. "Did you hear that?" Jonah whispered, slowly turning. Eli nodded. "Upstairs?" "No, below us." They aimed their lights at the floor. Beneath the cracked linoleum was a faint outline, barely visible, a trapdoor. Jonah knelt down, brushing away decades of grime. A heavy metal latch sealed it shut, rusted from years of decay. "We'll need a crowbar." Eli didn't want to wait. He searched the adjacent supply closet and returned with a rusted pry tool. With a few heavy heaves, they broke the latch and opened the hatch. A wave of ice-cold air surged upward, extinguishing their flashlights for a brief, heart-stopping second. Click. The beams returned. A narrow stairwell spiraled into darkness. "Basement ward," Eli muttered. "This wasn't on the building's floor plan." He descended first, his footfalls echoing like distant drumbeats. Jonah followed, his camera now trembling slightly with each step. The air grew colder with every level until they reached a long hallway lined with barred doors. The walls were painted with crude childlike drawings, faces with empty eyes, bodies twisted unnaturally. Limbs stretched far too long. One door at the end was marked. Room 9B, Clara Winters. They approached cautiously. The door was open. Inside was a bed with leather restraints still fastened. A worn teddy bear lay in the corner, its glass eyes missing. Scrawled across the ceiling, in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "She's still here." Jonah turned the camera off. "What are we doing here, man?" Eli turned to him. "We're doing what no one else would. We're uncovering the truth." As he spoke, a loud metallic bang echoed from somewhere behind them. Both men jumped, whirling around, flashlights swinging wildly. Nothing. But when they turned back toward the room, the bed was empty, and the bear was gone. Eli's breathing quickened. "We didn't imagine that, right?" Jonah raised the camera again, trembling. "Let's just get what we need and go." They backed out of the room, only to find that the hallway no longer looked the same. The drawings on the walls had changed. The stick figures now had open mouths and the eyes. They were all looking at them. "Jonah," Eli whispered, "something's happening." From the end of the hall, a light flickered on, soft, pulsing, like an old bulb struggling to stay alive. A shadow moved in front of it, a human shape. It moved, not like walking, but like dragging. They ran, up the stairs into the hallway, back toward the main lobby. But the entrance was no longer there. The doors had vanished. The hospital had shifted. Jonah looked around, eyes wide. "It's like it's changing, reacting." Something screamed from the depths below. Not human, not animal, just wrong. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Jonah's arm, pulling him down the hallway. The walls seemed to close in on them, the air growing thicker with each panicked breath. The shadow at the end of the hall, whatever it had been, was gone, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. The footsteps behind them, the whispers that barely brushed against their ears. It was as though something was always just a few steps behind, ready to pounce. "What the hell is happening?" Jonah gasped, tugging at Eli's sleeve. "This place, it's not just some abandoned building, it's alive." Eli didn't reply. His mind was racing, trying to process the madness around them. He tried the door to the left, a maintenance closet, locked. The sound of scratching came from beneath their feet, sending them both stumbling backward. What the hell was that? The hallway ahead stretched endlessly, as though the building was refusing to give them a way out. They sprinted down the corridor, trying door after door, but each was either sealed shut or opened into a room that felt more like a tomb than a living space. Behind them, the echoes of footsteps continued, growing louder with every passing second. Finally, they came to a door that actually opened, revealing a small, dimly lit room filled with cracked mirrors hanging crookedly on the walls. The faint smell of something metallic filled the air. Eli stepped inside first, glancing over his shoulder to make sure Jonah was close behind. "What is this?" Jonah muttered, running his hand along the cold surface of one of the mirrors. His reflection barely registered, more like a faded blur, just enough to make out a vague figure. But as he leaned closer, the reflection started to twist. His own face, warped, disfigured, like it was smiling at him in a way his real face could never do. Eli grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "We need to get out of here." Jonah didn't protest. The air in this room felt heavier, pressing down on them like a vice. A deep, unsettling hum filled the space. Eli turned toward the only other exit, but as he reached for the door handle, it slammed shut of its own accord with a deafening bang. The mirrors seemed to shift, tilting, their angles distorting, making the room feel like it was closing in on them from every side. Another scream came, this time from somewhere much closer, a low, guttural sound that crawled into their ears like something from the depths of hell. Jonah froze. "Eli, what's that?" Eli strained to listen, the hairs on the back of his neck standing at attention. It wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was something else entirely, something ancient, something that had been hidden here for far too long. "Stay close," Eli whispered, pulling Jonah toward the only other door in the room. It was a heavy metal door, rusted and scarred by time. "We can't stay in here." They rushed for the door, and this time, it opened without resistance. The hallway beyond was darker than the rest of the asylum, the shadows stretching and folding like they were alive. As they entered the next corridor, the temperature dropped sharply, their breath fogging in front of them. It felt like they were walking into the mouth of some beast that had been waiting for them. A low chuckle echoed from the walls. Jonah spun around. "Did you hear that?" Eli didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on something ahead, something in the shadows, something moving. It was faint at first, but then it became clear. A shape in the darkness, tall and thin, almost impossibly tall. The figure was hunched, its movements jerky, like it didn't quite belong in this world. It had no face, just a dark void where its features should be. "Run," Eli said, voice trembling. But Jonah was rooted to the spot, his eyes wide with terror. "What the hell is that? What is it?" The figure jerked its head toward them, and that was enough. They turned and ran. They didn't look back. The asylum twisted again as they fled, the walls shifting, the floors buckling beneath their feet as if the very building was trying to swallow them whole. They reached another door, a set of double doors half open, revealing a wide staircase descending into pitch blackness. "Should we go down there?" Jonah gasped, breathless. "There's no choice," Eli shouted, pulling him toward the stairs. "We need to get out of this place." They descended quickly, feeling the air grow colder with every step. The faintest flicker of light appeared at the bottom, like a distant lantern, but it seemed to be moving. Someone or something was down there. The steps creaked under their weight, echoing back from the darkness. But they kept going, faster, until they reached the bottom. When they stepped onto the cold stone floor, the world around them seemed to shift once more. The light at the end of the hall became clearer, revealing an old gas lamp, dimly flickering. But as they approached, they saw something that made them stop in their tracks. It wasn't a person holding the lantern. It was Clara Winters. Her figure was hunched, her back to them, her ragged hair falling around her face like a veil. She stood motionless, staring at the wall ahead. "Clara?" Eli whispered, taking a cautious step forward. But before he could get any closer, Clara turned. Her face, no, her eyes, they were empty, hollow, black. Jonah stumbled back, his heart racing in his chest. She's not real. This is a hallucination. This is just another trick." Eli didn't know what to believe anymore. The walls themselves felt like they were closing in, the floor beneath them trembling as though the very foundation of Ravenhurst was about to collapse. The shadowy figure from before, it was here, watching them from the other side of the room. And Clara, her mouth stretched wide into a grotesque grin. She didn't speak, not in words, but the message was clear. They had made a terrible mistake coming here, and now they would never leave. Eli's breath caught in his throat as Clara's empty eyes bore into him, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. There was no warmth in her stare, no humanity left, just a void, a darkness that seemed to pull at his very soul. He could feel the air thickening, pressing down on his chest, making it harder to breathe. "Jonah," he whispered, his voice strained. "We need to get out of here, now." Jonah stood frozen, his camera trembling in his hands. His wide eyes darted between Clara and the shadowy figure that loomed in the corner of the room, barely visible in the darkness. It was waiting, watching, but Clara wasn't moving. She was just standing there, staring. Her skin was ashen, stretched tight over her bones. Her mouth opened wider, revealing sharp teeth where soft lips should have been. A sound, low and guttural, escaped her throat, like something not quite human, more of a growl than a word. And then, as if responding to her unspoken invitation, the figure in the shadows stirred. Eli's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like they were made of stone, glued to the cold, unforgiving floor. He couldn't look away from Clara, from her dead eyes, from that smile that spread impossibly wide across her face. The walls around them seemed to pulse, breathing in sync with the distant thrum of the lamp's flickering light. "Clara," Jonah finally managed, his voice barely more than a whisper. "What happened to you?" Clara's head tilted slowly, her grin widening further until it looked unnatural, like the muscles in her face were stretching beyond their limit. The grin split open into a mouth that should have been impossible, the edges raw and jagged like something had torn it apart. Her voice, when it came, was a distorted rasp, an echo of something long dead. "You shouldn't have come here," she rasped. "Now you're mine." The air seemed to freeze. The temperature dropped so rapidly that Eli could see his breath fog in front of him, his heart racing faster with each passing second. The shadow moved closer, dragging its long, spindly limbs across the floor. Its body was a patchwork of darkness, too tall, too thin, impossibly long. Jonah stepped back. "This isn't real, it's all just hallucinations. It's the Asylum playing tricks on us." But even as he said it, Clara took a step forward. The floor creaked under her weight, and with that sound, all rational thought began to unravel. Eli's mind screamed for them to leave, but his feet were rooted to the spot, as though some force was holding him there. Suddenly the air was alive with whispers. Low, distant, overlapping voices filled the room, rising from the cracks in the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from every direction. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable. Pleading, warning, screaming. Eli snapped his head around. "What are they saying?" Jonah looked just as terrified. "I don't know, man. A sharp, sudden scream cut through the whispers. It wasn't human. It was guttural, feral, more like an animal than a person. Clara's head snapped toward the source of the sound. In the far corner of the room, another shadow was forming, something even darker than the first. A figure with no shape, no clear form, just an impenetrable blackness that twisted and writhed. The darkness began to take shape, growing taller, larger, until Eli could see that it was something human, but not quite. It had no face, no eyes. Its body was thin, twisted, as though it had been stretched too far, too thin, and then pulled back again. The arms were too long, the legs too short. It was a monstrosity of limbs and darkness, an abomination that didn't belong in the world of the living. "Eli," Jonah's voice was barely audible. "What the hell is that?" Eli didn't have an answer. All he knew was that they needed to leave. "Now. Run," he shouted, turning on his heel and bolting back toward the stairs. His heart was pounding in his chest, and adrenaline surged through his veins as he tore down the hallway, with Jonah right behind him. The shadows seemed to follow them, closing in, moving with an unnatural speed. The whispers became louder, more urgent, filling Eli's ears with a maddening chorus. "You cannot escape." The voice was everywhere, inside his head, scratching at his mind, sending shards of fear deep into his soul. The stairs loomed ahead of them, but the moment they reached the bottom, they realized it was too late. The path behind them had changed. The stairwell that had once descended into the depths of the asylum now stretched impossibly far, like some kind of twisted labyrinth. The walls had shifted, the angles no longer making sense. It was as if the asylum had transformed into a living thing, a creature feeding on their fear, their confusion. "Eli!" Jonah screamed. "Where do we go now?" Eli's mind raced, his eyes flicking over the walls, trying to find some way out. There had to be something, anything, something he could use to break the cycle of terror that had ensnared them. But the asylum was alive, breathing, pulling them deeper into its madness. Another scream echoed from the darkness. They had to get out. With no other options, Eli grabbed Jonah's wrist, dragging him through a narrow door on the right. The room was small, barely big enough for the two of them, but it was a chance. It had to. The door slammed shut behind them, and Eli's heart skipped a beat when he realized they were no longer alone. In the center of the room was a metal table. Straps had been attached to the sides, the remnants of old restraints still hanging loose. And standing next to the table was Clara, her head turned, eyes still empty, mouth still twisted into that nightmarish grin. But she wasn't alone anymore. Behind her, through the cracked walls, Eli could see faces, dozens of them peering out from the darkness. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths gaping open in silent screams. Some were old, their skin rotting away, while others were fresh, still alive, still trapped in the asylum. Jonah backed away. "We've got to get out of here. They're everywhere." But the door, they couldn't get back through it. The air thickened, the walls closed, and the whispers grew louder. The walls seemed to pulse as the air grew heavier, thick with an unseen weight. Eli's breath came in shallow gasps, and his hands were slick with sweat. The whispers from beyond the cracked walls grew louder, overlapping in a haunting symphony of agony, despair, and madness. "Jonah," Eli rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to move. Whatever this is, it's getting stronger." Jonah's eyes darted frantically from Clara to the faces that appeared from the darkness. Behind her, there were dozens of them now, faint, distorted figures emerging from the walls, their hollow eyes fixed on the two. Each face seemed to carry the burden of an ancient torment, their silent screams echoing in Eli's mind. The twisted, warped faces reminded him of the patients who had disappeared from the asylum all those years ago, people who had never left. Clara stood motionless in the center of the room, her grotesque grin stretching wider, as though it were impossible for her mouth to expand any further. She didn't move. She didn't need to. The shadows around her shifted and twisted, like tendrils of darkness, reaching out to them. One of the faces, an old man with a thin, hollowed-out mouth, seemed to step forward from the wall. His voice was a raspy, broken croak. "You're not the first, not the last." Eli's heart skipped a beat as the man's hollow eyes locked onto him. There was an understanding in that gaze, a recognition of something ancient, something beyond reason. The air seemed to hum with the old man's words, vibrating with an energy that Eli could feel deep within his bones. They are here," the man rasped, his voice like the grinding of metal. "You cannot escape." Eli grabbed Jonah's arm, his grip firm but trembling. "We have to get out of here. Now." But there was no way out. The door was still shut. The darkness pressed in around them like a living thing, swallowing the light from the gas lamp. Clara's form was growing more distorted by the second, as though the very essence of the asylum was warping her, turning her into something else. Jonah's eyes were wide with terror. "What do you mean, escape?" he whispered. "There's no escape. We're trapped in here with them." The old man's laugh came then, a low, dry sound that sent a chill through Eli's spine. It was a sound that shouldn't belong to a living creature. It felt like the last laugh of something ancient, something long dead. The old man's face began to crack, the skin splitting as though the very essence of his being was unraveling. "You will never leave," the man croaked, his voice fading into an echo, as the cracks in his face spread further. Eli backed away slowly, his eyes darting around the room, searching for anything, any escape. But there was nothing. The room was closing in on them, its dimensions warping as the shadows shifted like liquid darkness. It felt as though the asylum was trying to consume them, its walls bending and stretching to fit some unholy design. Suddenly the shadows in the room began to pulse, and Clara took a step forward, her head jerking unnaturally toward them. The darkness that surrounded her seemed to swirl like a storm, churning in on itself as her smile widened, impossibly wide. "Come closer," Clara's voice whispered, her tone low and sweet, but laced with something dark. "Come closer and you will understand." Eli's legs felt like lead. The pull of the asylum, the weight of the darkness, was suffocating, pulling him closer to Clara. The voices, the whispers grew louder and more insistent. They were no longer just voices. They were faces twisted in agony, their mouths open in endless screams. He shook his head, trying to clear the fog that clouded his thoughts. It wasn't real. This wasn't real. He had to fight through it. He had to get out. But the air was thick with fear, and every breath he took only seemed to draw him deeper into the nightmare. "Jonah, we need to fight back," Eli shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you have anything? Anything at all?" Jonah's hands were shaking, his camera still clutched in one white-knuckled grip. He looked at the camera like it was his only lifeline. I don't know, man. I don't know what's real any." Eli's pulse raced as Clara stepped forward, her body jerking unnaturally with each movement. She was no longer human. Her form was a collection of shifting shadows, her face a nightmare of contorted flesh and voids. The closer she came, the colder the room became, and the shadows around them seemed to breathe. The faces in the walls started to move, their mouths opening wide. They were speaking now, chanting in unison, their voices rising in a low, almost hypnotic murmur. "Join us, the endless night, forever." The words were meaningless, but they carried with them an undeniable weight. It was as though they were calling to Eli and Jonah, offering them a place in the darkness. The walls pressed closer, and the light from the gas lamp flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced around them. Jonah stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Eli, I can't do this anymore. We have to get out. We have to." But it was too late. A loud crash sounded from the corner of the room, followed by a deep, low rumble. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the walls shook, sending dust falling from the ceiling. Clara stopped moving. She was staring at the far corner of the room, her head jerking unnaturally toward the source of the noise. A door appeared, suddenly, where there had been nothing before. A door that hadn't been there moments ago. It stood tall and sturdy, a stark contrast to the crumbling asylum around them. The handle was cold to the touch, and it hummed with a strange energy. "That's our way out," Jonah gasped, his eyes wide with hope. "It's the only chance we've got." But Clara's laughter filled the room, a high-pitched, inhuman sound that made Eli's blood run cold. She turned back to them, her form warping even further. "You think you can leave?" she hissed, her voice distorted. "You're already part of it. You always were." The door swung open with a deafening creak, revealing an even darker corridor beyond. The air that poured from it felt like a cold, suffocating fog, heavy and choking. But beyond that, beyond the darkness, they could see movement, shapes in the shadows moving slowly, stalking. Eli gritted his teeth. There was no turning back now. The door was their only chance. "Jonah, move!" Eli shouted, grabbing his friend by the arm and pulling him toward the door. But Clara's voice stopped them cold. "You can run," she whispered, "but you will never escape." The corridor beyond the mysterious door swallowed Eli and Jonah like a gaping maw. The air was colder now, sharper, as if the walls themselves exhaled frost. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally, like something was mimicking them, step for step, breath for breath. "This place keeps changing," Jonah whispered, camera still clutched tightly. "It's not just a building anymore. It's alive." Eli didn't respond. His focus was locked on the hallway ahead, where the ceiling curved downward at odd angles, and the floor creaked underfoot like brittle bones. The light behind them from the previous room vanished in an instant, snuffed out like a candle. Total blackness threatened to consume them, until a dim red glow flickered from overhead bulbs, barely illuminating the path with a hellish hue. The corridor branched in three directions. To the left, a series of shattered windows revealed pitch-black night beyond. The center led deeper into darkness, with walls covered in warped, aged paintings, portraits of unfamiliar faces with eyes that moved. And to the right was a sound, a slow, dragging shuffle, a wet one. Middle, Eli said, not hesitating. We don't have time to figure this out, but the asylum had other plans. The second they stepped into the center corridor, the ground beneath them buckled. A thunderous groan echoed from below. The floor collapsed with a violent jolt, sending both of them plummeting into the black. Eli landed hard. His body struck something cold and wet like half-frozen mud. Jonah landed nearby, gasping, his camera clattering out of reach. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence was suffocating, as though the asylum itself was listening. Then came the whisper, "You're in it now." Eli sat up quickly. They were in some kind of underground chamber, far older than the rest of the building. The walls weren't tiled or bricked like the upper level. They were carved from rough stone, damp and mossy. Symbols were etched into them, archaic angular markings that shimmered when touched by the red glow, still emanating from above. Jonah found his camera and flicked it on, using the night vision mode. The screen lit up green and grainy, but clear enough to reveal what lay ahead. Rows of patient beds lined the stone walls, rusted metal frames, torn straps, and in each bed, something moved. "Holy hell," Jonah breathed. "These aren't beds. These are holding cells." The figures strapped to the beds twitched under soiled sheets. Their skin was gray, waxy, mouths stitched shut with coarse thread. Their eyes rolled under pale lids, and some still tried to scream, muffled gurgles escaping past their closed throats. Jonah stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. "What the hell is this place?" Before Eli could answer, a loud clang echoed from the far end of the corridor. A steel door, opening. They ducked behind a rusted gurney as a shadow moved into view. It was tall. Its body was wrapped in tattered medical robes, stained deep with crimson and brown. Where its face should have been, there was only a mask, a rusted apparatus bolted into the skull with long metal needles protruding from the sides like whiskers. It dragged a hooked pole behind it, the end smeared with something dark. The thing, once a doctor perhaps, glided past the beds, pausing at each one. It seemed to inspect the twitching, moaning patient. Its gloved hand reached out and adjusted straps, tightened buckles, scribbled invisible notes on an equally invisible clipboard. Then it stopped. Its head snapped toward the gurney where Eli and Jonah hid. Neither moved. Neither breathed. The masked figure took a slow step toward them, then another, the metal pole dragging behind with a high-pitched screech. It was only inches away. The stench of rotting antiseptic and death clung to it like a second skin. And then, it moved on. Eli waited several seconds after it passed before exhaling. "It didn't see us." "No," Jonah whispered. "It heard us. But it's blind." It was smelling. The fear in Jonah's voice made Eli shiver more than the cold ever could. Carefully, they crept along the opposite side of the room, passing the rows of still-living husks. One reached out with a trembling hand. Its fingertips brushed Jonah's leg. He screamed. The creature heard. It spun violently, slamming its pole into the wall, shrieking with a mechanical, ear-piercing screech. The patients began to thrash wildly in their beds. As the doctor stormed down the row, "Run!" Eli yelled, grabbing Jonah by the jacket and sprinting toward the far end of the corridor. They reached the old steel door just as the creature rounded the corner. Eli threw his shoulder into it. It groaned, stuck with rust and resistance. The creature howled behind them, a sound so shrill and unnatural that it reverberated in their skull. Jonah joined in, both of them heaving against the door until it finally burst open. They tumbled through, slamming it shut behind them, and jamming a nearby pipe through the rusted handle. The screams on the other side continued, but didn't follow. They were in another hall. This one was cleaner, whiter. It looked like a different part of the asylum, entirely untouched by time or decay. Pristine tiles, white fluorescent lights overhead. "Where the hell are we?" Jonah gasped, panting hard. Eli shook his head, equally baffled. It's like we jumped into a different reality. As they moved forward, they noticed something strange. The walls here were covered in photographs. Patients, doctors, staff. But their faces were familiar. Too familiar. In the third row, center photo was Eli, staring out from the frame. Next to him, Jonah, younger, pale, dressed in hospital gowns. What is this? Jonah whispered, voice trembling. Why are we in these pictures? Eli stared, mind reeling. His vision began to blur. The photo wall shimmered, and suddenly the faces were moving, blinking, watching them, from inside the frames. Then came the voice again, this time more distinct. You never left, Eli. You never left. The lights above them flickered violently, and then behind them, the sound of something dragging metal across tile. The doctor was coming. The scraping of the metal dragged closer, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. Eli and Jonah stood frozen in the white-tiled hallway, backs to the photo-covered wall, breaths shallow and shaky. The lights flickered once more. One blink, two, then darkness, total. Then a loud snap, fluorescence, above reignited in strobing bursts, like a malfunctioning strobe light. With every blink of artificial light, the silhouette appeared closer, closer still. The masked doctor, its mechanical face twitched unnaturally, needles jutting from its skull casting twisted shadows along the walls. In one hand it clutched a blood-soaked straitjacket, in the other a serrated surgical saw, red and wet. As it advanced, its joints cracked loudly, unnaturally, like old wood splintering under pressure. Back, go back. Eli hissed, yanking Jonah toward a nearby side corridor barely visible beneath the intermittent lighting. They sprinted, boots pounding against slick tile, shadows chasing them like liquid ink. The corridor led into a series of locked doors. Eli didn't think he rammed the nearest one. It opened, barely, and both of them slipped inside, slamming it shut behind. They were in a small operating theater. The room was circular, surrounded by a mezzanine balcony above, where rows of rusted folding chairs sat empty. A rust-streaked surgical table lay in the center, and overhead, suspended by chains, was a surgical lamp, whose bulb flickered with erratic sparks. But that wasn't what froze Eli and Jonah mid-step. Lying on the table was Eli, pale, unmoving, eyes wide open staring at the ceiling, mouth agape in silent horror. His chest rose and fell slowly, mechanically, as though he was still breathing, but there was no life behind his eyes. What the hell is this? Jonah stammered, stepping back. Eli didn't speak. He couldn't. The version of him on the table blinked. Jonah screamed. The Eli on the table whispered, his voice broken and echoed. He's watching. We all are. Suddenly, chains from above jerked downward with a metallic rattle. The lamp swung violently, casting chaotic spirals of light. The room trembled, shadows danced around the edges like unseen figures circling them. And from the balcony above, movement. A dozen pale figures in medical gowns stepped into view, their expressions blank, eyes white, mouths sewn shut. Each one was identical. Each one was Jonah. Every copy stared down silently. Slowly they raised one hand and pointed at the real Jonah. Then they spoke in perfect unison, not with their mouths, but with their minds. You left us. We remember. Jonah backed away, stumbling over an overturned tray. No, this isn't real. This isn't from the ceiling. The chains dropped lower. One looped around Eli's arm, another around his leg. He cried out as the metal bit into his skin, trying to pull away, but it was too strong. The version of himself on the table remained still, unmoved, lips curling into a small knowing smile. Jonah rushed forward, grabbing one chain, pulling hard. Hold on, I've got you, man. But the chains had minds of their own. They twisted like snakes, coiling around Jonah's neck, lifting him slightly before hurling him across the room. He crashed into a stack of rusted medical equipment with a groan. Eli gritted his teeth, grabbing a scalpel from a nearby tray. As the chains hoisted him halfway off the floor, he swung wildly. Metal clanged. Sparks flew. A link snapped and he dropped with a painful thud. The shadows screamed. Every Jonah on the balcony exploded into clouds of ash, their forms disintegrating with shrill, keening wails. The ghostly Eli on the table convulsed violently, limbs flailing, eyes rolling back into his head. The surgical lamp above shattered with a blast of white light, and the room plunged into blackness again. Then silence. Breathing heavily, Eli crawled over to Jonah, who lay groaning amidst the wreckage. "You okay?" Eli asked, helping him up. Jonah nodded, spitting blood. "Yeah, I think so. That was what was that?" Eli didn't answer, because behind Jonah, etched into the wall in fresh red script, were the words they were never patience. They were offerings. Eli's stomach dropped. "We need to keep moving." They stumbled out of the theater and into another hallway, this one more decrepit than the last. Paint peeled from the walls in strips. The lights were dim, almost yellowed, casting everything in a sickly hue. Ahead stood a tall archway above which read the words Ward D. Experimental Psychiatric Treatments. Jonah paused. "Wasn't this place shut down in the 50s? Eli nodded. "Yeah. After a fire that no one ever explained. And after 100 patients went missing." "Right," Jonah whispered. "The same number as in that mass grave outside." They stepped into Ward D. The smell hit first: burnt hair, scorched flesh, and formaldehyde. The hallway split into separate rooms, each with names printed on brass plaques. Room 1, tension therapy, electrical submersion. Room 2, emotional reset, lobotomy and vocal cord severance. Room 3, reality therapy, sensory deprivation and hallucinogenic isolation. Each door was cracked open, and sounds drifted from within. Screams, metal scraping against tile, incoherent murmuring, the hum of electricity. But one room, Room 4, had its door sealed tight. A single nameplate hung beside it. Room 4, Clara Monroe. Eli's blood froze. "That's her." Jonah turned slowly, staring at the door. "Do we open it?" Before either could answer, the door began to rattle violently. Then silence, a whisper from within. "You came back, Eli, finally." The hallway lights dimmed further, and the door handle began to turn on its own. Jonah raised his camera slowly, training it on the door. His hand shook. "This is it, isn't it?" Eli didn't answer. He stepped forward. As the door creaked open, a gust of freezing wind blasted through the hallway, sending the camera from Jonah's hands. The footage flickered as it hit the ground, still recording. From within the room, something stepped into view. A figure, feminine, tall, cloaked in a hospital gown, skin pallid, stitched. Her face was a nightmare of melted features and endless black eyes. Her voice slithered through the air like smoke. "I remember you both. You don't remember yourselves. But you will." Eli's legs buckled slightly. Jonah stood frozen. Clara Monroe smiled. Clara Monroe stepped fully into the light, her stitched-up face twisting into a grin that stretched far too wide. Her eyes black, voids that seemed to pierce through everything, into Eli, into Jonah, into their very souls. The air in the room grew frigid, a bone-deep cold that rattled their teeth. Her breath, if it could be called that, was a rasping hiss that cut through the stillness. "You shouldn't have come back," she murmured, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. Her hands, thin, brittle fingers, reached out to them. Eli took a step back, his mind reeling. "Clara, but we didn't." Jonah's voice was shaky, his camera lying forgotten on the floor. "Who are you? Why are you doing this? What is this place?" Clara tilted her head, her movements too fluid, too unnatural. It was as though she wasn't quite human, like a puppet whose strings were pulled by some unseen force. Her smile never wavered. "You don't remember," she whispered, "but you were never meant to leave this place." Eli's blood ran cold, his breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" The room seemed to contract around them, the walls pressing in closer, the stench of death and decay overwhelming. The door slammed shut behind them, locking with a metallic clang. Clara's laugh was a hollow, echoing sound. "You've been here before, Eli, all of you." She turned her gaze to Jonah. "And you You were supposed to stay with her. Eli's heart skipped a beat. Her. Clara's grin deepened. Your sister. You think you escaped? You think you moved on? Her voice dropped to a whisper, so low, so sinister that it made Eli's skin crawl. The only way to leave Ravenhurst is to forget. The air in the room grew heavier with every word she spoke. Jonas stumbled backward, his hand touching the cold stone wall. The images from the walls began to blur in his mind. Photos of patients, of staff, of horrors long forgotten. Faces twisted, eyes moved, and then Eli saw it. A photo at the far end of the room. A faded image of a boy with a familiar face. Eli, his younger self, standing next to Clara Monroe. They were in a dark room, bloodstains on the floor, and a figure in the background, a doctor, his face obscured, holding a syringe. The memory hit Eli like a freight train. He gasped, his body shaking violently as the memories flooded back. No, it couldn't be true. You did this to me. Eli whispered, his voice breaking. You made me forget everything. You. Yes, Clara replied, her voice gleeful. We made you forget, Eli, and now, it's time to remember. Jonah's eyes flicked to the photo and his expression shifted from confusion to horror. Eli, no, this is not possible. I thought we were free. Eli muttered, a tear slipping down his cheek. I thought we made it out. Clara's eyes gleamed with sadistic delight. No one escapes Ravenhurst. Not truly. You're here because you were always meant to be. The asylum is alive. It knows you. It remembers you. Jonah shook his head frantically. What the hell is this? Why are we even still here? Clara's smile faltered for a moment. You're here because it needs you. The asylum feeds off of your pain, your fear, your guilt. It consumes your memories, your souls. It keeps you here forever. Suddenly the walls seemed to pulse, as if the asylum itself was breathing. The photographs on the walls flickered and shifted. Faces from the past, long-dead patients, doctors, nurses appeared in front of them. Their eyes stared out, watching, waiting. You both belong to Ravenhurst now, Clara whispered, her hand hovering just inches from Eli's face. And once it's done with you, you'll never leave. Eli tried to back away, his legs unsteady, his mind fighting to process the flood of memories. He remembered the fire, the scream, Clara's twisted face, as she forced him into the flames, the terror in her eyes, the pain. The memory hit him with brutal clarity. He wasn't the one who escaped. His sister was. Clara had tricked him. She had forced him into the fire so that she could leave Ravenhurst, abandoning him behind. She had left him for dead. Clara, you lied to me, Eli shouted, rage building inside him, mixing with the fear. You killed everyone here. Clara's expression shifted. For the first time there was something like regret in her eye, but it was fleeting, gone in an instant as she raised her hand. Don't you dare try to take that from me, she hissed, her voice crackling like a broken radio. You were never meant to leave this place, and you will forget, just like the rest. With a sharp flick of her wrist, Eli felt the world around him spin. The air grew thick, suffocating. His mind screamed, but the noise was drowned out by the pounding of his heart. The room warped, and suddenly he was back in the hallway, back at the beginning, back at the front door. The firelight flickered, dancing across the walls. Jonah stood beside him, as if nothing had ever happened. But Eli knew. He remembered now. He remembered the faces, the voices. He remembered everything. The scream that tore from his throat echoed, but it was swallowed by the sound of the asylum's walls closing in around them. There was no escape. The darkness was here, and it was hungry. The hallway was suffocating. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, pushing inward as if the asylum itself were closing in on them. Eli's breath was ragged, his heart pounding violently in his chest. But no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't escape the truth that had finally sunk into his mind. The asylum was alive. Jonas stumbled beside him, looking over his shoulder every few seconds, panic evident in his eyes. Eli, what's happening? This isn't real. This can't be real. But Eli couldn't answer. He couldn't even think. His mind was flooded with memories. Fragments of his life before Ravenhurst, his family, his sister, Clara. The truth was undeniable now. The faces in the photographs, the twisted echoes of screams, the cold, cruel experiments, they had all been part of something much darker. Ravenhurst wasn't a place of healing. It was a prison, and they were just pawns in its endless cycle. As they rounded another corner, they found themselves at the entrance again, the heavy wooden doors of Ravenhurst looming before them, taunting them with their false sense of freedom. The firelight flickered behind them, warm, inviting, promising an escape. But Eli knew better. He had escaped once. He had died once. And now there was no leaving. Jonah grabbed his arm, shaking him violently. "Eli, wake up! We're going to make it out of here." But Eli pulled away. "No." His voice was low, almost hollow. "We're not getting out, not this time." Jonah blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "We're right there, Eli. That's the door. We just have to—" "I told you," Eli interrupted, his voice cracking. "We're stuck here. We're part of it now." Jonah's eyes widened, the panic creeping back. He took a step back. "No, no, you're wrong. You're wrong about this." Eli turned toward the door and stepped forward, his hands shaking as he reached for the handle. It was cold to the touch, colder than it should have been. The firelight from within danced across his face, but there was no warmth in it. "Eli," Jonah whispered, his voice trembling. But Eli didn't look back. He opened the door. The world beyond it was the same. It was as though nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The outside world was no longer just the outside. It was an endless loop, a mirror that reflected their deepest, darkest fears. The trees were twisted, their branches reaching toward them like fingers. The sky was black, but the stars were no longer shining. Instead, there was only a red mist, thick and suffocating, creeping along the ground. Eli stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It wasn't the world that was wrong. It was them. Jonah was shaking now, his face pale. He backed away from the door, as if he were afraid it would close on him forever. "Eli, please, please, let's just go. We can leave. We can find another way." Eli didn't answer. This was the only way. He turned back to face Jonah, his eyes wide with the realization. "This isn't about escaping, Jonah. It's never been about that." Jonah was silent. His eyes flicked nervously around, searching for a way out. "What do you mean? We've been through hell and back, and now you're just giving up?" "No," Eli said, his voice flat. "I'm not giving up. This is the truth. There's no getting out of here. Ravenhurst feeds on us, on our pain, our guilt, our memory. It keeps us here, trapped in an endless cycle. Once you come back, you never leave." Jonah's face contorted in disbelief. "No, no, Eli. We're not dead. We're not, don't you see?" Eli shouted, his voice raw, tears streaming down his face. "We are dead. We were never meant to leave. And now we're part of it. The asylum owns us." The walls of Ravenhurst trembled, shaking as if it were alive, as if the entire building were listening to Eli's words. Jonah took a step forward, his voice desperate. "Eli, please, we can break the cycle. We can." "You can't," Eli said, his voice breaking. We tried for years, and each time we think we're free, each time we think we've escaped, it just pulls us back in, over and over, because Ravenhurst knows us. It knows everything." Suddenly the ground beneath them cracked open with a deafening roar. The floor buckled and cracked, and the lights above flickered out. Dark, cold tendrils of shadow snaked up from the fissure, wrapping around their legs, pulling them back toward the abyss that had opened up before them. Jonah screamed, but it was already too late. Eli reached out to grab his arm, but the shadows had already begun to pull him away. The walls shifted, and the air thickened with the stench of rot. Ravenhurst's cruel, mocking laugh echoed through the corridors, surrounding them, suffocating them. Jonah was dragged into the darkness, his screams fading into nothingness. Eli fell to his knees, gasping for breath, his body trembling as the shadows closed in around him. He had thought he could escape. He had thought that if he faced the truth, he could break free. But Ravenhurst had other plans. The darkness enveloped him completely, and then everything went black. The doors of Ravenhurst slammed shut behind him. And so, the dark legacy of Ravenhurst Asylum continued. They thought they were uncovering secrets, exposing forgotten truths, buried beneath dust and decay. But some doors were never meant to be opened. Some places once left behind should remain untouched, because Ravenhurst doesn't just trap bodies, it consumes souls. Eli and Jonah were never the first to fall victim to its whispers, and they won't be the last. Now the real question is, would you dare step inside? If you had the chance, would you ignore the warnings, follow the shadow, or would you be smart enough to never look back once you hear it calling your name? Let me know in the comments. Would you spend a night in Ravenhurst Asylum? If this story chilled your bones and kept you on edge, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with someone who thinks they're brave enough to handle what lurks in the dark. Because here, in the world of horror, the next tale is always watching, and it might just be about you.